How can I ethically seek to shut down the speech of others? Does that mean that we should censor the hate speech because of what it might lead to? After what happened in Charleston and after this election, I began to think maybe so.
I think the government needs to step in and regulate hate speech.
I know freedom of speech should be protected, but I also believe there should be protections for people who suffer the brunt of hate speech harms. And now more than ever, they need that protection.
Quote, I am Antifa, unquote, Dr. Billy Murray, Antifa professor to call for violence, April 24th at Villanova University. As usual, there is a webpage version of this video with all the links, tweets, videos, and etc. See the links below for that, and to subscribe to us on BitChute because YouTube is phasing out channels like ours. It seems yet another Antifa professor is calling for physical violence from Antifa against people who exercise their First Amendment right to free speech as well as their other civil rights like the right to peaceably assemble and so on. No, it's not Mark Bray, the author of Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. No, it's not Eric Clapton, the bike lock attacker. No, not Dwayne Dixon, the guy who told people to put their bodies on the line to get into traffic and to get ready to get hit right before Heather Heyer did exactly that and was murdered by James Fields ramming his car into her. And no, not the middle school teacher Yvette Falarca. This time it's Dr. Billy Murray, who, according to academia.edu, is a rhetorical activist scholar who teaches a course on rhetoric and social justice, and who attends Antifa riots, and who is against civil rights. Quote, as a scholar who studies community responses to hate speech, she gravitates towards incendiary confrontations, unquote, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. Notice the terminology used here. This person, like many people like her, like to use the word community. They speak of themselves as a community. They claim that their riots are communities defending themselves, or the community taking action, and so on. Are they the community? Do they even represent the community? No. They often attack other members of a community. And it seems, with the way that they are sometimes bussed into a community, that they're not even from the community that they claim to represent or be. One wonders how many of the Antifas that we have seen on video telling people that they call fascists that you're not from here, you're not wanted here, go back to the town that you came from, and etc. are actually not from that town, but rather bussed in. Communities are made of families, not exclusively, but largely made of families. It is very difficult to imagine that the people who act as Antifa do so as families to any degree, except perhaps maybe a rare cousin and sibling pairing or something like that. But we can safely assume that they are, rather, acting on their own and against the views of their family. In fact, when, Tabby has found hundreds and hundreds of Antifas, and very often they do not share the views of the rest of their family members. In fact, their views are almost always opposed to the rest of their family. And hence they don't represent their own families. Likewise, they don't represent their own community any more than the far left represents the entire political compass. No, they want you to think that they represent their communities because it makes it sound like what they do is more justifiable, but they don't. They represent a very small minority of hateful, fringe sociopaths. This source also says that in her classroom, she teaches that arson is a justified form of resistance and thinks that destruction of private property is justifiable too. Some, like myself, say that the best answer to bad speech is good speech, but according to Vice, quote, she doesn't buy that more speech argument, unquote. On the Villanova University campus events page, we see that there is an upcoming lecture by Dr. Murray titled Reimagining Activism as Combative for April 24th, 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time at Villanova University at 800 East Lancaster Avenue, Villanova, Pennsylvania, 19085. That's near Philadelphia. Telephone number 610-519-4500. They write, in this presentation, Dr. Billy Murray will challenge the violence/non-violence binary that limits our understanding of activist practices. Drawing on examples from her fieldwork with anti-fascist activities, she will argue that we should reimagine activism as combative. Such an expanded understanding will allow us to better discern the efficacy and ethics of combative tactics and how they work in concert with Traditional Nonviolent Activism. The lecture will be held in Driscoll 134, ACS approved. Here's an online flyer for the event, so it does seem that she will be advocating for violence. Has she changed her position on that, or is she just being duplicitous? I ask this because according to the bio piece on her from just last November by the Chronicle of Higher Education, she has said, quote, "As an activist, I support anti-racist action and anti-fascist organizing, but I draw the line at engaging in violence," unquote. She understands, though, why Antifa groups engage in what she calls symbolic violence, unquote. Methinks that she either flip-flops or just lies depending on what source is interviewing her. One might wonder what sort of university Villanova is. According to the Wall Street Journal, at least according to the American Conservative, the administration encourages students to report on professors who engage in wrongthink. That's my own word that I'm using there. That is, for not being progressive enough. In other words, they want students to report on teachers who are not part of the regressive left. I say according to the Wall Street Journal, according to the Conservative American, because if you try to get the actual quote that the Conservative American took from the Wall Street Journal, you would have to pay. And I'm just not willing to pay, so, I'm not sure if they quoted from the Wall Street Journal correctly. I have no idea if the Conservative American is reliable or whatever. But at any rate, without paying anything, you could see a little bit of the Wall Street Journal article. You could see that it's headlined, "A Mole Hunt for Diversity, quote-unquote bias, at Villanova, an atmosphere of fear-imposed silence makes it impossible to achieve a real liberal arts education." And you can see below a little bit where it says, like many colleges in the USA, Villanova University has launched an effort to monitor its faculty for signs of quote-unquote bias in the classroom. And I have to give the Wall Street Journal credit for putting bias in quotes. They continue, "As Villanova professors," by the way, this is authored by some of the professors at Villanova for the Wall Street Journal. It continues, "As Villanova professors, we believe this mole hunt for bias undercuts our ability to provide students with a liberal education." And by the way, folks, if I have to say this, if you really don't know these things, I'll say this. It's not that I am for hateful speech. It's not that I'm for Nazis or fascists or anything like that. It's just that when these people say something is hate speech, when they say something is bias, when they say something is racist or someone is a Nazi, they're almost always wrong. That's one of the main problems there. I mean, granted, no matter what your views are, even if you are a Nazi, you still do have civil rights. You don't agree with me? Fuck you. You don't like it? Good. However, there's also the issue of what they say is hate speech and what they say is bias is almost never what they say it is. They just politicize things. They know that these words have power and that there's a lot of good people out there who will go, "Oh, whoa, that's hateful? Well, I'm against that." Or "That person's a Nazi? Well, I'm against them." They know that they could take advantage of people by using these words. So there you go. For a lot of you, that goes without saying, but maybe for some of you that doesn't. So now you know. Let's move on. Princeton professor Robert P. George tweeted this on April 16th. 1. We're heading for a bad place. Note a lecture hosted by a quote-unquote peace and justice center questioning, quote, the violence/non-violence binary, unquote. That, quote, limits our understanding of activist practices, unquote. There are folks on the right also, quote-unquote, questioning that, quote-unquote, binary. He doesn't actually give any examples for that, but okay, let's move on. 2. Before it's too late, sane and honorable conservatives and sane, honorable progressives need to unite around the conviction that we resolve our differences not by violence, but by the constitutionally prescribed mechanisms of our Republican democracy. 3. However deeply we may disagree, even on profound questions of justice and the common good, we are not enemies, but rather fellow citizens. Quote, we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection, unquote. And then look at this response here by a Sarah Armstrong. I'm a proud Villanova alumni, but I'm certainly not proud to read this, and that the description of her speech certainly indicates she is pro-violence. It seems this will not be the first time she gave a lecture calling for violence. On her curriculum vitae at academia.edu, it says she gave a lecture titled, Is It Okay to Punch Nazis? Faculty Congress Teach-In Series at Villanova University on March 24, 2017. One might wonder if she has been becoming more radical since her paper from 2016 titled Words That Wound, Bodies That Shield, Corporeal Responses to Westboro Baptist Church's Hate Speech, in which she argues for non-violent tactics. Now, it seems to me that even though, even last November, she seems to be duplicitous in her position on this, it does seem, as far as I can tell, that she has drastically changed after the whole Charlottesville thing. And you might get that impression too if you watch as many interviews and read as many things from her as I have recently. One might shudder to think what she'll include in this book that she's writing, tentatively titled Ally Tactics, Public Responses to Hate Speech, and what she wrote in her journal article, still under review, titled #GetWokeNova, Combating Bias on Campus Through Micro Practices of Allyship, or what she said in her presentation, Who's Allowed to Punch a Nazi in 2017, or what she said at the convention, Putting Bodies on the Line and Words into Action, Celebrating the Joys of Challenges in and Opportunities for Civic Engagement. Now, where have we heard this phrase, put your bodies on the line, before? Bodies on the line. Oh, that's right, Dwayne Dixon, the Antifa professor, another Antifa professor, told people to put their bodies on the line, to get into traffic and to get ready to get hit in Charlottesville shortly before Heather Heyers was killed.
Be willing to put your bodies on the line, but if the cops aren't going to stop them, they all know you're here, right? They're going to drive by your ass, or someone's going to get hopped up and run your ass over, right? Right? Right. Alright, so we know traffic's coming this way, right? Get in that intersection and start turning traffic that way. Get someone down the next block to start screaming and comes towards us, right? Right! Move! Move! Some of you stay here. Some of you are willing to put your down. Go over there and get ready to get hit.
I am death.
Get hit! Get hit! Bodies on the line! Get hit! Get hit! Put your bodies on the line! Hey! 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 Get ready to get hit! Get hit! Get hit! Get ready to get hit! Your body's on the line! Your body's on the line! Get hit! Get hit! Your body's on the line! Move! 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 When someone's gonna get hopped up, run your ass over! Someone's gonna get hopped up, run your ass over! Move! 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 Over there! Get ready to get hit! Over there! Get hit! Get hit! Body's on the line! Get hit! Get hit! Your body's on the line! Get ready to get hit! Get hit! Get hit! Get ready to get hit!
Is that a trope, an oft-said phrase among the far leftists, by the way? In the aforementioned talk from 2016, Putting Bodies on the Line and Words into Action, she uses the phrase many times.
Put your body on the line for social justice. Put their bodies on the line. They form lines of resistance, putting our bodies on the line. I have to put my body on the line, lines, line, line, lines, 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 line, 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 lines, line, 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 lines, line, 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 the line, 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 lines, 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 line, line, lines, line, 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 line.
She recognizes how horrible it is that Heather Heyer was killed in Charlottesville, and yet she thinks people should engage in the very same sort of action that got her killed in the first place. You know, obeying Dwayne Dixon, the guy with the gun, the Antifa professor with a gun, ordering people to put their bodies on the line. So why would this deranged, lunatic professor tell people to engage in the same exact action that got Heather Heyer killed? It seems that death, that murder of Heather Heyer by James Fields, is what maybe flipped her lid. Okay, she even says that's when everything changed for her and she changed her views on things. Okay, if that changed your views on things, why? Because it was so horrible, okay, that it traumatized you. Why would you then tell people to go ahead and repeat that? This woman is dangerously insane, okay? Do not listen to this woman. Drop out of her classes. You know. We can see that she's also written and lectured about disruption a number of times in what she calls social justice, activism, hate speech, protesting, the Occupy movement, and so on. Under professional development, we see here on page 7 of her curriculum vitae, Safe Zone Volunteer Training. Okay. Now let's look at this tweet by her university. Villanova University professor Billy Murray and Georgetown Law's Arjun Seth, I guess, joined Vox's Consider It with feminist Abulus, I guess, and Shermichael to discuss hate crimes and what action we can take to prevent them from happening in the future. Well, I'll give you one. Don't go standing in traffic. Don't put your bodies on the line. The tweet links to this video, Hate Crimes Are on the Rise, What Can We Do to Stop Them?, in which she says she is less willing to call for laws that violate civil rights, specifically the First Amendment, during Trump's presidency, but is okay with it beyond Trump's presidency.
Do you think there should be a larger burden on the government to start regulating hate speech? If it's speech that's going to incite violence, should the government say, you know what, we need to do a better job of regulating this?
So I've really struggled with that because I used to argue a lot that absolutely that was necessary, that regulations for hate speech were absolutely necessary so that we don't get to the point of hate crimes and violence against people in that way. I'm less willing to say that in this current administration. I'm concerned that that time has passed because we are living under this administration who, one, will never enact any kind of regulation like that, and if it were, would probably use it to work against the very people that it's supposed to protect. And so what I do see, to sort of build off your point, is that gives me hope is people are going out in their communities, they are allying with other people, they are standing up in their communities and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate this, we're not going to have this, we're going to push back against, white supremacy and hate in our communities. And they do so in really creative and amazing ways. And you see a lot of people engaging in solidarity, engaging in allyship practices to sort of push back against this. I think the government needs to step in and regulate hate speech as well, but I'm concerned about doing it in our current climate, because it is a very, very tricky balance to sort of make sure that those kinds of regulations are not used to stifle the speech of people who have most been oppressed in our history.
How stupid does one have to be to think that if the government makes laws against so-called hate speech, that this wouldn't be used against her and against all of us? During Trump's presidency or not. Like, okay, let's say that if Ilhan Omar gets elected president, now you have this intersectional dream. You have a woman of color who is Muslim, okay? And let's say during her presidency, they pass laws against so-called hate speech. Do you think that they won't use those laws either during her presidency or in the next presidency or the one after that? You think they really won't use those laws against you, you fucking moron? This just shows that this is, okay, that you could be an idiot and still earn a PhD, as long as, I guess, you toe the line, or as long as you engage in right think as opposed to wrong think. You have to be an incredibly stupid person to think that, if you hand the government that power, that it won't be used against all of us. Moving on. Now notice this response from an Eric Swallowswell. Preemptive physical violence to prevent potential verbal quote-unquote violence? Insane. Orwell would be horrified that socialists have fully embraced fascism. Sickening. And look at this one from Refuge Center 90210. Are you giving us express permission to use violence? On the academia.edu page for Murray, we see that her quote, current research explores public responses to hate speech and issues of allyship in activist communities as she participates with other activists in counter-protests against white supremacists and other hate groups. A rhetorical activist scholar, Dr. Murray believes that her research should contribute to social justice and the public good, unquote. So, she's a social justice warrior, she believes in safe spaces, and she believes in people getting their bodies run over. You can read her papers here, by the way. Looking at a list of papers she's written, I clicked on one and saw right away that she cites the SPLC as if it were a credible source. As a student just a few years ago, I would never have been so sloppy so as to use such a bad source like that. On the one hand, the SPLC has falsely accused people in groups. For example, they labeled moderate Muslim Maji Nawaz as an anti-Muslim extremist, and they lie about the Proud Boys while saying that Antifa is not a hate group, and so on. On the other hand, there are allegations of racial discrimination and sexual harassment leveled at their co-founder, who has recently been fired. And in the webpage version of this video, I've included a number of articles about this stuff. I've also included the Is It Okay to Punch Nazis? Faculty Congress Teach-In series at Villanova University, March 24, 2017, as well as When Neo-Nazis and Anti-Fascists Clash, This Professor Wants to Be in the Thick of It by the Chronicle of Higher Education. Another thing, folks, keep your eye on this woman. It does seem that she's getting more and more attention from the far left and making more and more appearances on TV shows, internet YouTube channels, and so on. This woman is a deranged lunatic who all but flat out admits that she's lost her mind since Charlottesville. Not that she really had much of a mind before that. And, you know, if you watch her lectures, she really doesn't say anything very interesting. Everything she says is predictable, but she really is a deranged lunatic and a sicko and a very bad person. That's what it comes down to. She's a bad person. She's calling for violence against people who are falsely accused of being fascists, and she should really rethink her positions and become a good person. And then maybe apologize for ever even thinking about calling for violence. Conclusion: if indeed this Antifa professor calls for violence, then, wrap your head around this, she wants the government to take away your free speech by undoing the First Amendment, and yet she engages in the only kind of speech that is not protected by the First Amendment. Calls for violence, calls to action. That's a bit askew, don't you think? This deranged lunatic must wake up. Okay, everyone, make sure again you subscribe to us on BitChute. Peace for the peaceful, tough love, equality of opportunity, not of outcome, and liberty for those who respect the freedom of others. Thanks for watching.